Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santy, and he is Mike Huber. Hi, Mike.
Hey.
We're going to do another episode where Mike has an idea he wants to talk through, so we're just going to record it and let everybody listen as we work through this idea. So let me jump in and just do this quote, and then Mike, I'll let you start with it, okay?
Okay.
This is from Peter Gray. He has a Substack, if folks aren't aware of that. And this one comes from a post he wrote called "What Exactly is Play?" And he says, "The rules of play provide boundaries within which the actions must occur, but they do not precisely dictate the actions. The rules always leave plenty of room for creativity. Activities that are precisely prescribed by rules are better referred to as rituals than as play. Play is always creative."
All right.
Sorry for stumbling through that. I haven't really
Yeah.
talked much yet since I woke up.
Oh, yeah, no, I know. This the hard part of recording early.
Yeah. Early
Yeah,
for me. Other people have probably been up for 5 hours. It's like 10 o'clock. Anyway,
well, and when they listen to this, who
yeah,
knows what time it is?
exactly.
Anyways,
What, Mike?
um,
What?
yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot because I think what I'm writing about right now is pretend play for kids, which is very rule bound
Mhm.
and yet also really whatever expansive.
Mhm.
That idea that whatever you can be this it can start with your Rainbow Bright and or sorry, Rainbow Dash. Man, going to the wrong.
I was like, do people still play Rainbow
No,
Bright?
sorry, that was
Excuse me.
that's
Yeah.
my age.
Yeah.
But yeah, Rainbow Dash, and you're like whatever, pretending to fly fast, and suddenly you decide that you're a dragon because you want to be more powerful,
Mhm.
or whatever it is. You like the play keeps changing
Mhm.
often, especially as children get a little older and more practiced at pretend play. But I would argue even the most basic pretend play as well. Um, but you slowly like change, and
Mhm.
yet you're still following these boundaries. It's just you
Right.
might change where the boundaries are.
Yeah.
And that's play versus if you think about what I guess Peter Gray is calling rituals of, I mean, even simply like sports.
Right.
When you watch kids play sports, it's like you are doing something within these rules that everybody is following.
Mhm. Right. And
And
it's a problem if you don't.
it's a problem if you
Yeah.
don't. And people who play sports choose to do that for that reason. And
Mhm.
if anything, they get upset if somebody else doesn't follow the rules. And
Mhm.
they might push the envelope with that, but then when they get called on it, they are called on it.
Yeah.
But with play, it's different. Like if a child jumped right from Rainbow Dash and then started like, the other kids were also My Little Ponies, and then they suddenly started shooting,
Yeah.
you know, uh, whatever rarity or something, like that would not fly, right? That
Right.
doesn't fit the boundaries.
Mhm.
But boundaries, I like because it's this idea that it can keep changing
Mhm.
as you play. I mean, so if I was doing a sports metaphor, I might think of like playing catch with a frisbee, and you start where you're each in one spot and you're trying to throw it roughly to the person,
Mhm.
and maybe you're not a good throw, or it goes differently, so the person has to run over, but no one thinks you're like breaking the rules.
Right. Right.
And you might slowly, either like my brother and I, because we both talk a lot, we'd get closer and closer till the end we're about 2 feet away and just talking. Or you might like expand out farther, like you realize, everyone's skill is whatever, or there's a tree that keeps getting in the way,
Yeah.
or whatever, and you just keep moving,
Mhm.
versus ultimate frisbee where there's very specific rules.
Mhm.
And so I think thinking about that with children, there's a lot going on with them following these self-imposed rules,
Mhm.
and I would also say group imposed rules, because sometimes there is a child who's maybe doesn't know the storyline,
Yeah.
maybe sees someone's toy My Little Pony but has no idea about anything else. And actually, with a lot of 3 and 4 year olds, it's just the color of the ponies and the names. It has nothing to do with the personalities of the ponies. I don't know why
Right.
we're going with ponies
Yeah.
today, but
I don't know. Mike woke up with My Little Pony today. So I think this is
yeah.
really an interesting way to think about power that
Yeah, yeah.
and I hadn't I'd thought about this rules within play before, but not necessarily in context of power because for one thing, there's a couple of different spots developmentally, theoretically, where we start to talk about children understanding games with rules or wanting
Right, right.
to play with rules. And we interpret that as adults often as, oh, we can start sitting down and doing like board games, or we
Right, right.
can
Yeah, yeah.
play where the adult tells the child the rules and now they're ready for rules.
Yeah.
But what you're describing is the children having the power to use their own creative thoughts or impulses
Right.
to decide how the play is going to happen. So even if it's just that very familiar family pretend in the kitchen area,
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
there's still rules about, there's the assigning of the roles or the assumption of the
Right.
roles,
Yep, yep.
and that's part of it. But then, like, okay, so you're the cat. The rule says then that the cat is says meow and is down on, crawling. You can't be
Right,
walking
right.
and talking to me and be the cat.
Yeah, you're
And
not
that's
sitting at the table.
yeah, a really interesting way to think about, because I think a lot about how we withhold power from children
Sure.
and choice all day. You look at a typical schedule. I do this with students a lot. Look at a
Right.
typical schedule and tell me how often the child really gets to decide what happens to
Right,
them,
right.
for them, whatever. And this is a really easy way to give some of that power. It's much more authentic than the do you want the blue cup or the red cup?
Right, right.
It's allowing them the time and the space to play where this kind of stuff will just
Yeah. And
emerge.
yeah, yeah. And I think people who talk about why you would schedule things so much or decide so many things for children would
Hmm.
say, well, we're preparing them because in kindergarten
Yeah.
or in first grade, they're going to have to follow the schedule.
Yeah.
And to me, what it's ignoring is, well, before a child can follow an imposed schedule, they have to learn how to, you know, the basic executive function skills. They
Hmm.
need to be able to, one, mentally picture what the whole day looks like.
Hmm.
So, oh, okay, I can't do this right now, but I will be able to. So thinking of a third grader, I can't talk to my friend right now, even though they're sitting next to me.
Hmm.
But I can picture in my head that when we go to lunch, we're going to sit next to each other. So then following that, like controlling the impulse of wanting to talk right now, they have that ability because they also have worked on their um, working memory and
Hmm.
their mental flexibility of being able to, okay, I can't do it now, but I can do it later. Therefore, I can control my impulse.
Right.
And I think a lot of adults have the opinion, no, you just force children to do things at a younger age and they will
Right.
be able to do them. And
Yeah.
that's only true, again, going back to like, it's only true if you kind of like, in a sense, break the child, right?
Hmm.
Don't think any thoughts on your own. Be afraid of my wrath. And we might not
Yeah.
want to say it that way, but that
Right.
is exactly what we're doing. Even
Yeah.
if the wrath is whatever, I'm going to make you go sit away from your
Or,
friend.
oh, this makes me so sad when you do
Or
this.
yeah, or
Yeah.
playing, yeah, on yeah, emotional
Yeah. It's,
I don't know, lying to kids.
there's maybe a food shortage coming. So let's stop giving children food now
Right,
because then
right,
their
right. Yeah,
bodies will be used
they're
to
gonna have to
it,
do it. Right.
instead
But
of
it's even
thinking,
more
let's
than
give them
that.
all the things we need as much as we can now to make sure that they're like the
Right.
healthiest they can be when that
Well, and
thing
I would
happens.
even say in this metaphor, it's probably even more like let's learn how to garden.
Yeah.
Like let's learn what we could plant indoors in pots
Hmm.
and maybe grow so we can
Hmm.
have something to eat, right?
Yeah.
Because the idea of working on basic executive function skills around following your internal, your self-imposed rules or boundaries, I think is a better word,
Hmm.
and then following that, so like right now, oh, I switched from going back to the original thing. I switched from Rainbow Dash to a dragon, but they both fly. So I kept some part of that, but
Hmm.
also changed it because um I want to be scary too. And or whatever. And
Yeah.
and maybe the game itself, maybe somebody else turned into something first, or someone, but it's that idea that you're keeping some of it, you're being mentally flexible.
Hmm.
And right now, it's just in the moment and it's in your the things you can picture in your mind. But that, I mean, oh, so now I'm still getting future, like focusing on the future.
Uh-huh.
But if people are worried about that,
Yeah.
stepping back and allowing the play, children develop the basic skills. And I guess I would argue, so, forget about being prepared for school. It could be
Hmm.
that you really want to hang out with your friend and they're sick or whatever. So dealing with frustration in life.
Hmm.
Um, that it starts with being able to create boundaries yourself, change them as needed. And frankly, that's another skill that I think our schools fail at almost every age level,
Hmm.
is if you're like doing something and it's not quite right for you, you should be able to alter it. What would make sense?
Hmm.
Even if you're talking about some graduation standard for high school or to get your PhD, like what is the thing that's not fitting, and how do you adapt that to actually make you know, achieve the goal you set for
Hmm.
yourself?
Hmm.
So even when it gets as more of an adult idea of goals that you set and achieve, it still requires the same, originally that same setting of boundaries and then possibly changing them as you go.
Hmm.
Um, and this is definitely where I've been reading a lot more of Bandura's theory of agency, where he talks about you project yourself into the future, then you have the agency, so you might break down skills into thing or not agency, self-efficacy. So
Hmm.
you believe that you can do it, and you're going to do that by breaking it down to smaller skills. You're going to look at people who've already done it or
Yeah.
already done these parts of it, even if you're doing something past that.
Hmm.
And then you need that self-regulation to not get too frustrated from it
Hmm.
or whatever. And that sense of agency is something that allows us to have hope, whether it's having an illness and just knowing here's the things I have to do now. It's
Hmm.
hard to imagine I'm going to be there, but I also have to, in some ways,
Hmm.
know where I want to get to so I can break down this is what I need to do this week or
Yeah.
today. And sometimes, the self-regulation is as much as I need to worry about all the different steps right now, I'm going to try to focus on this,
Hmm. Yeah.
and then having other people around creates some of that.
Yeah. And so this is for some people, I think this is a different way of thinking about self-regulation, what you're talking
Yes.
about, because so often what I hear and even what I see like in early learning standards,
Yeah.
when they're talking about self-regulation, they're really talking about being able to comply, being able to
Yes, that's true. The ultimate goal is to comply.
is compliance. And so we want students or children who can um uh sort of oh, the word is failing me. So I'll say squish down their
Yeah.
own feelings and
Right.
frustrations and needs to serve the group or to serve the leader.
Yeah.
And that's not what you're describing when you're
Right.
talking about
Right.
self-regulation here.
Yeah. And I do think that it, unfortunately still goes back to behaviorism,
Hmm.
right? That Bandura very consciously, when he was starting his work, I listened to a podcast recently where he talked about like he was going against behaviorism. And his whole idea was how can he show that no, you get to decide how to change? You don't need
Hmm.
people to like use these behaviorist methods to change you. You
Hmm.
need to do it. And what I like about the theory is it still shows where you might need support. But the support might be the person needs someone to co-regulate with them,
Hmm.
and reminder that everybody needs that. That is why we have friends or spouses, or and we turn to other people when we are at our most
Hmm.
emotionally vulnerable.
Hmm.
That's co-regulation. It's not just a thing that's like a weakness or like a deficit. It's a
Right.
thing that we all need
Hmm.
at times in our life. And then when we don't have it in person, we have to imagine those people. You know what I mean? Getting a
Hmm.
card from someone, or even just picturing, oh, I can't wait to see them again.
Yeah.
I'm going to survive this to get to see them or
Yeah.
whatever. I'm going to like the
Yeah. You're getting
harder
dark.
truths. I know. But even if you look at it as the positive, like, oh, I can't wait to celebrate,
Hmm.
getting this, doctorate
Yeah.
with these people. I mean, it's generally not the reason you're doing the doctorate, but also
Why
you
not?
do, yeah, right. Well, you still want to celebrate with them. You're still going to
Yeah.
plan the
Yeah.
damn
Another
party or
reason.
know someone is planning it for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you were talking earlier and you talked about self-efficacy, I think we can also pull in here when we're thinking about rules and play, and we can pull in maybe we can pull it in internal and external locus of
Oh,
control into
yes,
the
yes, for sure.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we know that we should know that or it's out there for us to find
Right.
that that's a big impact, a big
Yeah,
factor impacting mental health. And
right.
we are talking a lot, we're marketing things a lot,
Mm-hmm.
we're uh doing lots of webinars and things about mental health and early childhood,
Right.
when we're also then giving them programs where they spend their days with almost completely that external locus of control. Someone else
Right.
determines all day. And
Yep.
maybe I'm just restating what we've already said, but using different words. But I can't impact anything to change. And that idea, that constant experience of I don't have the power to change the thing that's hurting me or bothering me or I'm not comfortable with or it just isn't good for
Right.
me, um, is something we have to take seriously in our
Right.
programs with young children.
For sure. And it makes me think in a way, as you say that, right? That so part of it is, yeah, children need a sense of agency, sense of
Hmm.
power. Teachers need a sense of agency, sense of power,
Sure.
or
Yeah.
providers of any sort.
Yeah.
And yet these like social emotional learning, I think it was an episode we never actually recorded, but
Yeah.
but now I can remember the exact essay that we were going to record about.
Uh-huh.
But it was basically an article arguing against social emotional learning curriculum.
Yeah.
And I think
Oh,
that's
it
what it
was the
is.
curmudgeon,
Yeah, yeah.
curmud anyway, it's a blogger, an education blogger, something about a
Yeah.
curmudgeon. And he's
But I
like, I
think
don't,
that's what it gets at,
yeah.
is that like, oh, if you take this boxed curriculum of, oh, here's this
Hmm.
is what it looks like to be sad, this is what it looks
Hmm.
like to be happy. When you're sad, these are the things you do, or whatever, that
Yeah.
all those curricula like kind of do the same basic thing. And children do need to learn words for their
Yeah.
emotions, but getting through it is experiencing the emotions in some form,
Hmm.
that you're creating the basic idea that I can be sad, I can lose something and mourn the loss of my favorite blanket, grieve, and then find a way to deal with it because you're creating that basic schema around loss
Hmm.
that later, when something bigger happens, you at least have something to hang that framework on.
Right.
It's going to be a lot harder than when it turns out to be your pet, and then it's going to be even harder when it turns out to be a family member. And
Hmm.
of course, not everyone has the luxury of those things going in that
In that
order,
order.
but the more you have something, that schema, that framework to hang the heavier things on,
Hmm.
the more likely you are to get through it
Right.
with, um, I don't know what the right word would be, in a healthy way.
Yeah.
That you're all going to experience, but you might need more help or
Hmm.
more time than you would have had you been able to experience these things lighter. And the same is true of any, even the whatever you want to call it, more um the more, I don't know, positive emotions or whatever word you want to
Yeah.
use, like being happy
Right.
also. Like, how can you be happy without also like shaking your whole body so much you're actually hitting, knocking down your, classmate's building or something,
Yeah.
like you can have these controls around it, but it's the thing you have to experience. You have to have interactions with other
Hmm.
people, peers as well as adults when you're a young
Hmm.
child, and no boxed curriculum, no nothing on
Hmm.
Pinterest or
Right.
whatever is going to help you with that.
Right.
You might find a little thing of like how to like, because I do think that like just emotions, vocabulary around emotions,
Hmm.
it has to start with happy and
Hmm.
sad and scared and mad.
Yeah.
But, I think if we're not sharing more nuanced vocabulary with 4 and 5 year olds, we're doing a disservice. That there's a
Absolutely.
difference between being frustrated and irritated and furious, and you need to have the language around that, because if all
Yeah.
you have is you're either happy or mad, I can think of so many, and I know this is simplifying it, but
Right.
so many, young men who commit acts of violence
Hmm.
because somebody rejected them for something, of like, oh, you needed someone to walk through those emotions when you were
Hmm.
3,
Yeah.
when something happened that you didn't like, and didn't just get told, well, use your words,
Right.
because the person didn't think that it was their job to give you words,
Right. Right.
or
Yes.
even to empathize with you first, right?
Yes.
Or they were emotionally manipulating you, saying that makes me sad when you
Exactly. Yeah. Or they
don't
were
sit in
giving
your
you false
chair.
information
Yeah,
about what
yeah,
you were feeling.
right. And I don't want to,
Um,
like,
yeah.
doing one those things once in a while because you're still trying to get rid of those habits,
Hmm.
isn't what I'm saying.
Right.
But if we think that that's the way we're going to work with kids, and then, elementary school gets even harder with, well, social emotional learning is the thing we do Friday afternoon.
Right.
And
If
then
you
it's
were in
like, if,
it.
yeah, if you're, as opposed to, oh, something happened and this child's really frustrated, and we're
Let's
not
make
helping them
time
through
here.
those
Hmm.
emotions, and then we're going to leave it to the social worker who has
Yeah.
400 cases. Like the system, if we don't actually we don't take mental health seriously, if what we think we need to do is give children a
If
few hours of this or that.
or if we think that all we need to do is have some mindfulness in our circle time.
Right, right.
Those aren't necessarily the worst things that you could do with children, but it's not enough, and it's
It's
not
not the end
the
point.
kind
Yeah.
of authentic experience that's really going to lead to um, that kind of social and emotional literacy
Right.
that
Right.
that we hope to have.
Here's what I'll say specifically. If
Yeah,
you are doing some sort of breathing technique during your, circle
fine.
time or
Yeah.
whatever, then when the child is upset and you do that
Hmm.
same thing with them, they
Hmm.
are more likely to do it. If you haven't practiced it when
Right.
you're calm, you can't suddenly learn to do a
Right.
breathing technique while you're upset.
Yeah.
So
And it
that's
seems
the
punitive if
and
you
it
wait
seems punitive.
until
Yeah, yeah.
they're already upset or have done the thing you don't want them to do.
Right. So it's not saying you don't do that moment
Right.
at circle time, but it's only social emotional learning. It's only
Hmm.
something that they're actually going to take with them if it's also applied.
Right.
Without the application, it it's something that won't stick with you.
Right. Yeah.
Just
Um,
like learning letter of the week. When it's something that's
yep.
not applied,
Yep.
and therefore, in 4 weeks, it's gone.
It's gone. Yeah. Curmudgecation is the name of the blog I couldn't think
Excellent.
of. If anyone's really dying to go look, I think he
Yeah.
had a post. It was like, why I don't teach SEL, or I'm
Yeah.
not
And
teaching
it was a
SEL
while ago.
anymore.
And
It was a
well,
while
so now
ago.
we can pretend that we actually did the
Yeah.
episode
Check it off
because
our list. Um, but I want to go back to play here for a minute, because I feel
sure.
like
Yeah, we
that
did.
is like the ultimate, like so many other things, the ultimate place for children to play with those kinds of emotions, or the emotion
Right.
language and those powerful big feelings,
Yep.
in a place that they have some control, but also we're there. Like, I for that person who's like, well, when they're playing, I don't feel like I'm a teacher or whatever. I don't know
Right,
what
right.
to do. What's my role? Well, that's one of them, is to kind of
Yeah.
um uh be there as they're working through, in pretend or in real conflict that comes up, as they're negotiating rules and figuring out power between.
Right.
Um, that's a big
Yeah,
important thing for us to be prepared
for sure.
to
Yeah,
guide them
it's like,
through.
and that pretend play is that opportunity to try out those emotions
Hmm.
and kind of play with, this is how I do it. So it's
Hmm.
almost that schema of like, oh yes, this is a thing that's very scary, but I'm so powerful, I will
Hmm.
deal with it. Or this is a sad thing, like, oh, I whatever. I definitely have the kids who play sad play
Hmm.
too.
Yeah.
And I want to quote, so Kylie Cooper, who I work with, she had written her master's on, like, fear play, the way children
Uh-huh.
play with fear. And um, this is good. It is kind of a quote because it's going to be in my book. Like,
All
I
right.
already like, oh, that's how this chapter's ending, and
Yeah.
we'll see. It's first draft, so it
Yeah.
might change. But she talked about the way pretend play does this is because children can, if it becomes overwhelming, they can just step out of the role.
Right. Yeah.
But also they can really feel it. And children really do have this ability to get into that flow state
Mm-hmm.
where they are reacting in the emotions of the character they've taken on. And then if it gets overwhelming, they can step out of it. But in the meantime, they are experiencing a lot of, um, like their heart rate actually will go up. Or
Mm-hmm.
I actually did that once where I had kids wearing the bracelet.
Yeah,
It was amazing. Like
that's
during
fun.
pretend play, it's like, oh, they really seem to be experiencing these emotions,
Uh-huh.
you know. But she said that all this play comes to um a child being able to figure out, how do you find your way to safety? How do you find your way to consent? How do you find your way to acceptance?
Mm.
And even though it's pretend and they're doing it and they don't need to do it with you, you being there helps them get to that point if they don't do it on their own. Because if they're
Mm-hmm.
playing, um, especially more socially, so more typical like 4-year-olds or
Uh-huh.
whatever, where 5 kids are playing and suddenly 3 are dragons, but 2 of them still just want to, be My Little Ponies.
Uh-huh.
And suddenly the safety thing doesn't feel right because these other kids are pretending to breathe fire on me. And
Uh-huh.
even though it's pretend and it's in this realm of, pretend, the child can still experience it to a certain degree. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying that they actually are worried that they will get burned,
Right.
but they will experience the thing of a person overpowering them.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And so that's, stepping in and like, oh, what's going on here? It looks like we have, different
Mm-hmm.
ideas about play. And you being there to be able to do that, even if you don't have to do that,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that children know you are there to do that, if it gets to that point, allows them to push these boundaries and decide that we're going to change. We're going to go into this way that might be a little more scary, but I know that this adult is there to take care of me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's where pretend can really um uh allow children, like, you have a huge role in it, even if the role is simply to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then meanwhile, all those things the children are doing around whatever you want to call it, regulation, regulating their own emotions around things that can be scary or around
Mm-hmm.
things that can be happy too. Of course,
Yeah.
again, same thing, like whatever they're playing, they can try these things out in ways that are rule bound from their perspective, and they can um, alter that or step out of the role
Yeah.
whenever they want.
Yeah. So I'm thinking about the conditions of play now and how
Yeah,
how this all fits, but one of the things we know that makes play the way children learn best, one of the reasons why we know that happens is that it's relevant to them. So they're going to spend more
right.
time with
Yes.
it.
Yep.
They're going
Yep.
to stick with it longer, even when it gets a little weird for them.
Right.
They're going to, they just have that drive to remain involved and see
Yes.
what happens. And I think that when you combine that with this idea of power and emotional development
Right.
and executive function, like that's why this kind of play is so much more effective if our end goal is this, this regulated human being.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, because they're going to stick through it more than if we're trying to
Because it's
just
self-chosen.
it's
Yeah.
self-chosen and it's bringing them some sort of joy, even if it doesn't look like happy joy, just that
Right.
that keeps the brain engaged. And um that's just, we can still do if we have the curriculum that tells us we need to read the emotion book or look at the emotion
Right.
flashcards or whatever. That's how we connect our goal to their goal,
Right. Right.
with them still being sort of in control of the context of
Right.
that.
Yeah, and information is important, and
Hmm.
vocabulary is one that only comes from people who are more experienced, whether it's
Right.
adults or older children, and
So we should
regardless of
also be
what
modeling and using our own
domain.
emotional
Yeah,
language and being authentic in our tone and all
right.
that kind of
And
stuff. Yeah.
reading storybooks that
Hmm.
are engaging,
Hmm.
that do involve emotions,
Hmm.
rather than reading books about, or sorry, just reading books about emotions,
Hmm.
right? That having a storyline where a child does get frustrated or character gets frustrated is
Hmm.
going to be way more effective than getting this book that talks about frustrated
Hmm.
means,
Yeah, right.
right? And
Yeah.
there's some, if you it's okay to do both, especially if one has like a lot of words.
Hmm.
But if you don't also put in the context of a story,
Yeah.
or then it's like I can see a child
Hmm.
going to do pretend play and very much kind of doing this, trying out these different things. And
Hmm.
children can try out much more complex things in pretend play
Yes.
than they can in real life,
Hmm.
And I know sometimes people think, oh, but stuff like, playing like Luke and Darth Vader, there's good guy and bad guy.
Hmm.
And yet I've watched 5-year-olds kind of play with that line, Luke, I'm your father,
Yeah.
or whatever. And they usually have it simplified, but
Hmm.
I know the kids I'm thinking of, they learned it from Legos.
Oh,
Actually, one of
okay.
the kids, I learned that their bedtime stories from dad were stories about the
Like
characters
oral
from the first three
retelling
movies.
of,
Yeah, yeah, or
oh,
yeah.
fun.
So that's sort of mythology, but it's
Hmm.
based on these characters. But those ideas of like this idea of like, wait, it's father and son, and yet also they're in a battle to the death.
Hmm.
And a 5-year-old can hold both those things at once when it's in this context of a
Right.
story, and they're embodying that story.
Hmm.
Um, and again, this is self-chosen play. Not all 5-year-olds are ready to learn about a father and son battling to the death, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's which is fine. And that's why allowing kids to do this in their pretend play, they are self-choosing
Hmm.
based on what they know, and they kind of ignore the stuff they don't know. Most kids
Hmm.
I've seen play Star Wars over the years, it really is Stormtroopers bad, Princess Leia good, or
Lightsabers are fun.
and
Yeah.
lightsabers are fun. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's the other part of it, that joy of just the physical
Hmm.
um movement and contact, the rough and tumble
Hmm.
play that happens in there, the roughhousing, especially where kids are knocking each other over. What that does in a very physical sense is you are now having to figure out how to counteract what, because your goal was to stay up and hit the person with your lightsaber or your pool noodle or whatever.
Yeah.
And now you're being knocked over. So now physically you are trying to, how do I still, hit this other person
Hmm.
with my lightsaber when I'm no longer standing?
Hmm.
And so you're constantly, when you think about the mental flexibility to do that, especially while you're dealing with sensory input that's changing constantly, there's so much going on there, right?
Hmm.
And if you're not ready for it, what you do is you just fall down, which, is fine in the
Right.
context of the game. Most children are motivated to keep the game going, so the other child doesn't then take advantage of you being down unless you have that trust to,
Hmm.
oh, I'm going to keep doing this because, they think it's fun,
Right.
right? And if
Yeah.
they don't, they're going to say stop or
Right.
whatever, but you only do that when you have the trust to do that sort of thing. When you don't have the trust, usually the game is chase,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's some basic rules and
I
you
love
just
a good
follow it.
game of chase.
Yeah. And then you can add little pretend elements to it.
Uh-huh.
I'm a bear and I'm
Yeah.
chasing you. Now I'm a whatever,
Yeah.
stormtrooper and I'm chasing
Right.
you. Whatever the thing is, you're still just playing chase. And there's no difference
Hmm.
from the outside world, there's no difference.
Yeah.
In the internal minds of the children, there might be a difference. And
Hmm.
and I do think that that's the other thing to keep in mind with all of this is that you can't fully understand play by watching from the outside. And it's okay as long as you remember that.
Hmm.
Right. And that
I want
the yeah, go ahead.
I want you to explain that more.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. So I'm definitely influenced by phenomenology in this point, and I was
Uh-huh.
interested to see. I didn't read the full quote, but that Peter Gray is also talking about it, right? And so
Hmm.
um, the idea of phenomenology is that you can't understand anything without being part of it, right? So in some ways, this really influenced, anthropology for one, right? Of
Uh-huh.
like just going and looking at the people, oh, they do these weird things. Here's the weird things they do.
Yeah.
Versus I'm gonna go live with these people for 6 months and like, oh, that's why they always spit out the first bite of food, or
Uh-huh.
whatever the thing is,
Uh-huh.
right? You start to understand the context to a certain degree. obviously there's limits to that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you have your own experience before that. But at the same time, you do have more of an understanding. And I think the same is true of play,
Hmm.
that when I used to ban gunplay, for
Yeah.
instance, I was looking at it and saying, this looks too much like out there. I was in a neighborhood that did have
Hmm.
violence from firearms. And I was like, therefore, we don't do it here because it looks too much like that. Then, when I started to allow it and seeing the way kids were getting this sense of power from it, like they were feeling more empowered.
Hmm.
And a lot of times, sometimes the play would be things like, well, bullets can't hurt me. I'm
Hmm.
powerful. And as I watched them do it, I started to understand they don't actually believe that they literally can go out if there was, you know,
Hmm.
whatever, someone had pulled out a handgun on their block, that they would run out there and say, I can't be
Right.
shot. In the same way that when they were playing the game and they were like running and they saw somebody else like drawing a picture, they avoided that person. They could see the real world
Hmm.
and still be in this pretend play. So the more I kind of tried to follow along, the more I started to understand, oh, they're actually getting this sense of power from this
Hmm.
in a place that can feel uh you can feel powerless.
Sure.
Like you can have this fear of getting shot, and now it's like, oh, actually, there's this sense of power.
Hmm.
It doesn't take away from any, real life what you might need to do
Right.
to follow that, but you still need that internal like feeling, that self-efficacy that you can survive this,
Hmm.
right? So again, if it helps, thinking of, I think why I bring up adult examples is it's a
Yeah.
little easier for people to get into that mindset, to be part of it.
Right.
And so all I'm trying to say is that like with play, you're not going to fully understand if you don't follow it. It's like every book I've read with in early childhood talks about when they're describing kids playing, they always talk about the kids use their names, talk about what they're doing as a character.
Hmm.
And in the book I'm working on now, I try to write, if the child is in character, I'm only writing about, Bumblebee is doing this,
Oh,
right?
okay. Yeah.
Not Eric pretending
Yeah.
to be Bumblebee is doing this, because I think that then I lose too much of what are they doing. He's
Yeah.
trying, Bumblebee is trying to get away from Omega Supreme,
Oh, that's a good, yeah.
right?
Uh-huh.
And it shifts, and I see the writer I've seen do it the most is Elizabeth Jones.
Mm.
But what she would do is try to be playful in the beginning and endings of the chapter, like, but
Hmm.
pulling you in as the reader of like, oh yeah, I have to be playful to understand this.
Hmm.
Um, but it's been amazing even writing it, that I keep going, like I'll find myself drifting back to talking about the child. It's like, wait a
Hmm.
minute, they haven't stepped out of character. I have to stay in the character.
Uh-huh.
And it's really hard for my brain, but I do feel like even that little exercise helps me see, well, what are they trying to do?
Hmm.
And what is their experience? Like, oh yeah, it's really exciting to be
Hmm.
chased
Right. And
when you're in the
that's,
right mood.
yeah, yeah, that's a different perspective than like me saying, well, here's the reasons I academically know that children engage in power play. So when I
Right.
see the power play, I assume that they are doing these things
Right.
instead of saying, looking at the character that's being played and thinking of it in terms of the things, the actions, the words that the character is putting out there.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Changes. I would learn more deeply about what was happening than if I just said, here are my labels.
Right.
I'm going to throw them on here because it looks
Yeah.
like.
A friend of mine simplified it to, when you're looking at a cube, all you see is a square, right? And that's all you're going to
Mm,
describe. And that's what, if you just describe what they're doing social emotionally,
mhm, mhm.
it's this. Or you could view it as, this is what they're learning with literacy, because they're
Sure.
using, because
Which I
pretend
think is a
play,
starting point, right?
and
I
it's
mean, I think
okay,
there's
right?
there's
Yeah,
something to that.
for
I do that
sure.
a lot, but to go deeper
Yeah. And to be aware of it.
is
At some point, you
possible.
want to be aware that, oh, I am only looking at this part right
Uh-huh.
now.
Yeah.
And even what we were doing, some of it I was.
Hmm.
But then when you try to go into the cube in this example, and suddenly it's like, oh, there, I could also look at it this way, or like, oh, the emotions running through it. No wonder, like, I cringe at this, but my first year of teaching,
Yeah.
and the kids wanted to play superhero, and I felt out of control. like I'm
Uh-huh.
not controlling the classroom. So it was like,
Yeah.
let's be real superheroes. Let's be firefighters,
Yeah. That's the way it
you
always goes,
know?
right? Yeah.
And nobody wanted to play firefighter. I mean, once in a while kids do. I don't
Yeah.
mean to discount it, but
But it's not
even
the same need.
it's not the same need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And um and then, I do hear from my brother's friends with a firefighter. I guess I know one firefighter, and like they often talk about wanting to help people. And oh yeah, even when I was pretending, I was always helping
Oh
people.
yeah.
I played,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So people who are now adults, like I played Superman or I
Yeah.
played, and it's like, oh, you played the superhero
Yeah.
because you wanted to help people. And that was like a really like engaged way to do it. You felt like all your emotions around it. And I'm thinking people playing, firefighter, okay, well, they're first responders, and right now they're checking the person's pulse and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, they're getting the AKG ready, for like,
Yeah.
no, that's not what kids play. They're like they're hanging from a cliff and I'm
Yeah.
going to do,
Yeah.
and so it just when you go inside it, then you aren't going to suggest something like, oh, let's
Mm-hmm.
not play I don't even know what the latest superheroes are
No,
for.
me neither. But
Yeah,
I
but
mean, I had a classroom and it was twos, but there were a couple of boys who were like three and waiting for space to
yeah,
move
yeah.
up, and they
Right,
were
right.
much bigger than everybody else, and it was a small room because you need less square footage in a licensed toddler room than just all these factors. And they were playing Spider-Man essentially, and all it really
Right.
meant was run and climb and chase,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
but using Spider-Man language and or vocabulary. The director and another teacher were really upset about that and wanting to
Right.
stop it. And so their idea was, well, we'll do like a visit. We'll have some firefighters come in.
Yes. Right,
But
right.
but then when they did, the children sat and listened while the firefighters talked.
Right, right.
And when we really got down to it, the need was the movement,
Yep.
the freedom, the power.
Right.
They were in a space that was too small for them. They were
Yep.
being seen as problems when they were
Right.
just doing 3-year-old
Yep.
things.
Yep.
And it had really very little to do with um, Spider-Man making them that way.
Yeah. I worked at the first place I worked at was really close to a hospital that had like the helicopters would land
Mm-hmm.
on the roof,
Mm-hmm.
and so the kids would like when we were outside, they'd like be pointing at the helicopter, all excited. And so then one of the teachers arranged like us going to visit the airport where the helicopters come from, and we went and we, were talking, and so we're mostly, of course, we can't go out close to, I
Yeah.
think we got to look at a helicopter. I don't even think we were allowed to go in.
Uh-huh.
I mean, certainly it wasn't on at all when we were
Yeah.
doing it. But as we were leaving, the one kid was so upset. The kid who got so excited about seeing them that, wait, we're not going to get to fly in it? And it's like, of course, that's the thing they
Yeah.
want to do.
Right.
Like hearing about it, like having to sit there and listen to a thing about it
Yeah, it's not the same.
it's not the same at all. And I'd much rather have a kid pretend they're flying a helicopter and they're flying into tornadoes and they are crashing into
Mm-hmm.
mountains and they are, all these things that they can pretend and make it exciting
Mm-hmm.
to them as they learn about helicopters. And and if I think about it from their point of view, it's more the excitement about it. It's
Mm-hmm.
more they know that it's there to help people
Mm-hmm.
and they are trying to help people, but little did they know there was a tornado or whatever.
Right. They can't
Whatever
help
the things
nature.
are, but it's these very like broad things that
Uh-huh.
they're doing. And being inside it, even though, again, I'm an adult, I'm not there now, but if I can go into my kid brain and watch it from their point of view,
Mm-hmm.
afterwards, when I'm talking to them, it's like, oh, that was really difficult. I'm so glad you kept us all safe, right?
Yeah.
Like, so when kids are like, I'm a guard. I remember kids playing like Christmas dinner. There's a bunch of kids who celebrated Christmas. They're
Uh-huh.
pretending to have people come over. And one kid's role, they put on like a motorcycle helmet or something, and they stood with a big, block or
Mm-hmm.
something like 12 feet away and they're on the guard.
Yeah. Thank
And it was
goodness we
like
had a
that.
guard.
And yeah, and being able to see it from his point of view, well, thank you for keeping us all safe so we
Uh-huh.
can enjoy our meal,
Uh-huh.
right? Rather than, don't you want to go sit with everyone? Or, like if I
Yeah.
don't see it from within that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny in some ways because pretend play is all about perspective taking.
Yeah.
And we as adults decide that we are going to So right, there's like the real world, and then there's this mental imagery happening at
Uh-huh.
the same time. So there's
Uh-huh.
the things you can physically see, and there's the mental imagery. And kids are seeing mental imagery, and a little bit the other one, but
Hmm.
then the adults, if they don't, take the same perspective, the perspective shifting, they're just looking at as I'm a teacher watching these 4-year-olds sitting at a table,
Hmm.
and one child is standing 10 feet away.
Hmm.
So my goal is to have him come over and sit
Right.
down. If I go into it, what's going on? And so, you don't have to join the play to go into it. It can be, let me sit back and figure out what are all the roles.
Hmm.
And this is one I often help people as the baby step, right? What are the rules they're following? What are the
Hmm.
boundaries they've created?
Yeah.
And if that makes you feel better, then oh, instead of me giving these fake choices at other times to have them learn boundaries or learn self-regulation, I can watch all the self-regulation going on
Uh-huh.
when they are, whatever, pretending to shoot a tornado or
Yeah.
guarding Christmas dinner. And like, oh, he knows that the guard, if you were technically guarding something, you're not going to sit at the table with your loaded gun.
Right.
You're going to be
You got to
standing
be at the
12 feet
door.
away.
Yeah.
Like, but just that idea of if you can take the perspective. But I just find it funny that it's the lack of the adults shifting perspective
Hmm.
because they worry about the kids not being able to shift perspective, and that's
Right.
actually what they're doing.
Right. Right.
So,
And what is a key part of self-regulation and social and emotional growth is perspective taking
right,
and
right, yeah. And the
being
mental
able
imagery
and the
of,
mental
yeah,
imagery. Yeah. Yeah.
like what could we do instead of what's happening right now, and
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's funny to me, but I do think that's a key part of it. And for me, it was helpful to try to read some phenomenology,
Hmm.
just to like
Yeah. That's
get
what I'm going
us
to do with the rest of my morning now, as soon as we're done recording.
right, right, yeah, yeah. Um, well, now I'm spacing on the actual name of the text, but
I'm
Merleau-Ponty is
oh,
the author I'm thinking of,
okay.
and I
Okay.
do actually think that it was a huge influence on the Reggio Emilia approach.
Oh, really?
Or
Okay.
and maybe not his specific writing, but it's
Hmm.
interesting that in 1948, 1949, all these different things in Europe seem to be resolving around the idea of taking a perspective of, immersing yourself in another perspective,
Hmm.
essentially, that you can't understand things. Um, Merleau-Ponty talked a lot about just sensory, like
Hmm.
you only sense the world from your perspective,
Uh-huh.
and then to experience it, you're only experiencing it through your own senses. And so there's this thing that only can exist in the time and place that you are. And there's a lot of, I can see what's his name,
Malaguzzi.
Malaguzzi. Thank you. I always get the letters
Hmm.
wrong. Malaguzzi, like thinking of like, oh, the image of the child. What can a child do? So now
Hmm.
I'm shifting my perspective to the child.
Sure, that makes
Um,
sense.
and so it's this idea that, oh, we actually, when you start to take that image, then it's like, oh, the child can do all these things,
Hmm.
so um yeah, I'm not sure if they actually influence each other. It's interesting that it's happening almost
That's
at the same
cool to
time,
think
which
about. Yeah.
makes me think that they're all reading the same thing, or just realize that war is the extreme opposite of that,
Hmm.
especially what happened in Germany and France and Italy,
Right.
which is where I see these writings happening. Like, oh, when we really take our perspective and think this is what everyone needs, and therefore I'm going to enforce this
Yeah.
in the most, you know, physical sense of enforcing it. I am going to kill as many people as I have to have this point of view.
Uh-huh.
It makes sense that they're like, oh, actually, you know what if we tried to understand?
What if we did it differently this
What if
time?
we did it differently? And
If we
even if it's
tweak
something we
this.
don't quite understand, we thought, you know what? They
Yeah.
must come from a different experience than
Yeah.
us.
There you go.
So,
Yikes.
anyways,
Well, all right, we'll end with war if that's
and
what
with
you
more,
want to
yeah, that's
do.
right.
We'll just wrap this one
We
up
went,
with them.
yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. Started with Rainbow Dash, ended with war, which,
All right. Always a party when Mike's here. No, this is really interesting. I'm excited about the book. Uh
yeah. Yeah, and these are still like the half-baked thoughts because I'm
yeah.
in the middle of trying to make a coherent statement out of this,
Uh-huh.
but
Uh-huh.
they are
Yeah.
the things that are floating around. So thank
Yeah.
you.
No, thanks for
And
sharing it
thanks
all.
everyone for listening to
Yeah.
me rant, because
Yeah.
maybe now
Um,
some of these ideas will be in the book.
now they have to buy the book to find out if
And
what we
now,
said
yes.
here is really in there. All right, we probably better just wrap this up now.
Yeah.
We're to the point where I just start rambling and forget how to end that episode. So thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.